Hello, welcome back to Getting Started with Azure App Service Highlights. My name is Chris Howd.
I'm Jeff
here
Morgan.
with Jeff. And now we're going to talk about deploying to Azure.
So let's talk first about what an Azure Web App is. So an Azure Web App is part of the Web App Service Suite, and it includes web, logic, mobile, and API apps. Yep. In particular here, we're just going to focus on web apps. So a web app is basically somewhere where you can just put up a website, put up code that you can go ahead and show to the world. It'll run on Linux or a Windows host OS, so you can run this. You can run your site on Linux if you want to, or Windows, it's your choice. And a lot of the tech that you use already to build your site is ready and available to be used on Azure Web Apps. You can use .NET, PHP, Python, or just strictly HTML.
Yeah, that's great. So it's pretty simple too, right? Web apps are web apps. So.
Very easy. So, and a nice thing about it is it includes a lot of built-in diagnostics and analytics and monitoring for free. You don't have to do any work, and you get that kind of information from your site without any additional code from you.
So okay, so that sounds great, Jeff. So if you have if you need to deploy a big, company web app, or you have the small little home web app, or just a smaller single page app, is it a big difference, or is it pretty much the same thing for Azure?
No, so Azure will expand and contract to any size site you've got. If it's a little tiny site with 4 or 5 little HTML docs, or if you've got this massive intra-company intranet that you need to deploy and get out there, Azure will expand and contract however it needs to support your site.
Yeah, and I guess the big thing about Azure is it scales, right? It's all the scalability if you get more traffic,
right. So if I've got
seasonal.
a massive site with tons of traffic, right, I can pay to make sure it's always online and make sure it's geo-redundant. If I've just got a little site for a soccer team that I'm hosting or whatnot, I don't need all that stuff. I can go ahead and make a really small site for that.
Yeah, that's very cool. And so now we're going to start talking about the different types of deployments, right?
Right. So the simplest deployment that you've got to begin with is an FTP deployment. And so that is when you use Azure Web Apps as just a folder. It is just an online folder where I can go and I can put code up there, and it'll just display and serve up the HTML as I need. So very little work need to do, and I can connect with any FTP client. You can use FileZilla, you can use Windows Explorer, all that kind of stuff.
And you've prepared a little demo for us that we can kind of see an FTP deployment.
FTP, yes. So let's go ahead and take a look at that.
That's hard to say.
It is. Okay, so let's take a look at how we could do an FTP upload of our site into Azure Web Apps. So I've gone ahead and I've created a new Azure Web App, and I haven't done any modifications or anything to it. If I click here on the URL, you'll see that I'm just presented with the default deployment page here saying the site is up and running. So we'll go ahead and close that out. So the first thing you need to do in order to set up FTP is you need to come to this deployment credentials option over here on the left. And here we can set a username and password that lets us log in via FTP into our site. So I've gone ahead and I've picked myself a username. This username does have to be globally unique, so you may have to get a little bit creative in creating a username for yourself. So once you create the username, then you can go through here and also create yourself a password. I'll go ahead and do that. I'll go ahead and hit save then. This can take just from a couple of seconds to about 30 seconds, so looks like it went pretty quick that time. So I'll go ahead and close this and then come back here to the overview page. And over here on the top right, we're given 3 options here. So one is the deployment username here. Then we are also given the FTP hostname and an FTPS hostname. So we can use these to start our file transfer. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to copy the FTPS endpoint here. I'll go ahead and copy that to my clipboard. And I'm just going to transfer files using my Windows Explorer. So I'll bring that up and I'll drop this URL right into the box there. Okay, and so the first thing I need is that username, so I'll flip back here and I'll grab that username, and then I'll also type in the password that I created here. I'm going to go ahead and save that password and log in. And you go ahead and be presented with this screen. Sometimes you need to hit refresh for the folders to pop up. It can take a few seconds. Okay, great. So now I've got my 2 folders here that make up my site. So I'm going to jump into this one on the right, named site. And in here you'll notice there's a www root folder. This may be, if you've used IIS before, this may be very familiar to you, but if not, this is the folder that gets served up whenever somebody comes to visit your site. And so I'm going to go ahead and dive into the www root folder. And you can see in here all that there is right now is a hosting start.html page. This is the page that's currently being served, showing just that the site is up and running successfully. So all we need to do to publish our own site here is just publish another file that has an index.html, which will be served with a higher priority than this hosting start. Or you can just delete this hosting start as well. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into my editor here. I've got an index.html page. We'll go ahead and add a little bit of content in here as well. Do a nice hello world. Okay, so I'll go ahead and save that. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab it off of my desktop, copy that index file, and I'm going to paste it right in that www.root folder. And there we go. So now if we go back to the site here and I click that URL, we should see our hello world. You may need to refresh. There you go. And so we've done a successful FTP deployment to Azure Web Apps.
Okay, Jeff, great. Thanks for having that demo prepared. That was really cool.
Yeah, it shows just how easy it is to get a site up there with very little work, just a couple of file copies and you're good to go.
Okay, and now you have another video prepared. You want to kind of talk about that?
Yeah, so another way that people deploy code nowadays is Git deployments. A lot of developers are very used to using Git. You can use Azure Web Apps actually as a remote repository, just like you would push to your central code repo where you and your colleagues would all use the same code base. You can go ahead and push your code up to Azure as if it was a remote repo, and it'll do a deployment there. If you are an ASP.NET site or a node, it'll go ahead and do all the deployment scripts and all the package restoration that you need to get your site up there. So it's really quick and easy, and it's good for small projects as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at that demo.
Now let's take a look at doing a deployment to Azure Web Apps using Git. If you've used Git before, you can push to a remote repository, and when you push that remote repository, if you host it on Azure Web Apps, it'll automatically do a deployment of that code into your site, and you'll be able to have a pretty seamless loop of new code going out. So let's take a look at what it takes to get that set up. I will start with going back to the deployment credentials. If you haven't set this up already, you'll need to set this up. You'll need to set the password and a username because these deployment credentials are the same ones in FTP or using Git. Once you've got that set up, you can come over here to deployment options. Here we'll choose a source, and our source here is going to be the local Git repository. I'll go ahead and click that, click OK. After a couple of seconds, that'll be set up, and we'll be able to go back to the overview tab here. And you'll notice on the right that we now have a git clone URL. This is the address of our remote Git repository for our site. So we'll go ahead and go into our Visual Studio Code here. I've got that index.html that we had earlier, just the simple hello world in there. Let's go ahead and make this a Git repo. So I'll go ahead and come to my terminal here, do a git init on there. I've initialized that. Now if I come over to the source control, I can see I've got that one file. I'm going to go ahead and commit this file. Just call this the initial commit. There we go. And I'll go ahead and do that. Great. Now all we got to do is add the remote repository to our Git instance here. So I'll do git remote add Azure, and then we just need that URL, so I'll pop back over to the portal, copy that over, and there we go. To do a deployment then, all we have to do is push. So we'll do a git push Azure, and we want to push the master branch. And as soon as we do that, we'll get the request for our password. Key that in, and now with our code pushed up to Azure, it will start a deployment. You'll see here on the terminal that we can see the files that have been written, and you'll be able to watch the update to the site happen. Give that a couple of seconds. Great, deployment successful. We go over to the portal here and open that URL, and sure enough, we've got the hello world. Let's go ahead and do just a really quick update to the site. We can do hello world from Git. I'll go ahead and do another source control, another update to the source control here. So updated the message. Go ahead and commit that. And we will go ahead and do the same thing. We'll go ahead and push to Azure here. There we go, deployment successful. And if we refresh our page, there you go. Makes it really easy to get live updates on your site with very little downtime.
Okay, Jeff, another great demo. Thank you for having that one as well. And I guess I can see that that Git deployment is a little bit more powerful, right? I mean, it's a lot better, really.
It gives you a little
guess.
bit. You can integrate it into your code cycle a little bit easier if it's just another place that you can push your code to.
Yeah, so that's great. So we talked about deployments in Azure, and we talked about FTP deployments, and then we looked at that Git deployment. So that's pretty good. The edX course goes into a little bit more depth, right? Like we said, we start out with talking about Azure itself. We talk about the portal. We talk about setting up your Angular code, kind of a pre-built.
So we go ahead and we get it set up. We go in depth about all the different knobs and dials you can turn on Azure App Services to get them configured. We do go a little bit into environmental variables, how you can say that, hey, I'm in production or I'm in staging, and kind of configure your environments based on where your app has been deployed to. And then we look a little bit at how you can set up that configuration about what tools and platforms and technology you're going to use in your app service.
All right, great. So that kind of wraps up this section. We've talked about deploying to Azure, and we will welcome you back in a little bit when we talk about our next section.
Sounds great.